A landmark ruling has just been made in the world of climate litigation. An international court in France has ruled that a country's failure to sufficiently address the climate crisis can indeed violate human rights. In a world where climate change is increasingly seen as not just an environmental issue but a human rights one too, this groundbreaking verdict has taken a significant stride towards highlighting the intertwined nature of these two domains. Let's delve into the specifics of this case. The protagonists of this landmark lawsuit were Swiss women who courageously stepped forward to bring a case against their own government. They argued that Switzerland's lackluster approach towards climate change and its inadequate climate legislation violated their rights, specifically their rights to protection from the impacts of climate change. The court scrutinized the Swiss government's climate policies, their commitments, and their actions, or rather lack thereof, towards achieving the set targets. What they found was a glaring gap between the government's promises and its actions. The court ruled that the Swiss government's climate legislation was indeed lacking, and its failure to meet its own climate targets constituted a breach of the women's rights to protection from climate change impacts. This verdict is more than just a legal win for the Swiss women. It is a groundbreaking moment in the fight against climate change. It sends out a clear message to governments worldwide that inadequate action on climate change can be seen as a violation of human rights. This ruling, the first of its kind, is legally binding and now sets a precedent that can influence future climate litigation worldwide. But what led to this unprecedented ruling? Let's delve into the events leading up to it. At the heart of this story are the grievances of Swiss women who felt the brunt of the climate crisis in their everyday lives. They experienced firsthand the escalating temperatures, the erratic weather patterns, and the growing health risks associated with climate change. These women, living in a country renowned for its snow-capped mountains and pristine lakes, could not ignore the stark reality of their environment changing before their eyes. What they found unacceptable was what they perceived to be their government's inadequate response to this mounting crisis. Switzerland, despite being a signatory to various international climate agreements, had consistently fallen short of its climate targets. The Swiss government's climate legislation was seen as insufficient, lacking the necessary measures to significantly reduce carbon emissions and mitigate the effects of climate change. These Swiss women decided to take matters into their own hands. They believed that their government's failure to adequately address the climate crisis was not just an environmental issue, but also a violation of their human rights. They argued that by failing to meet its climate targets, the Swiss government was breaching their rights to protection from the impacts of climate change. So they decided to bring their case to an international court in France. The legal process was not easy. It required gathering evidence, building a compelling case, and navigating the complexities of international law. But their determination was unwavering. They were fueled by their conviction that their government had a legal and moral duty to protect them from the damaging effects of climate change. Their efforts paid off. The International Court ruled in their favor, finding that Switzerland's failure to address the climate crisis adequately did indeed violate human rights. This ruling, the first of its kind, is legally binding and sets a precedent for future climate litigation globally. Despite the dismissal of 2 other climate claims, this successful lawsuit is seen as a significant step in climate litigation worldwide. This ruling could potentially open the floodgates for similar cases to be brought against governments around the world, pressing them to take more decisive action against climate change. So, what does this mean for the future? The implications of this ruling are far-reaching. Indeed, this groundbreaking verdict has the potential to send ripples across the globe. It could prompt other countries to reevaluate their emission targets and hasten their pace in reducing fossil fuel use. The Swiss case has set a precedent, showing that failure to act decisively on climate change can be deemed a violation of human rights. This could prompt nations to reassess their environmental policies, not just out of ecological responsibility, but also to avoid potential legal ramifications. The potential implications for other international courts are immense. They may consider similar lawsuits, leading to an increase in climate litigation worldwide. This could put pressure on nations to take more drastic actions to combat climate change, knowing that their efforts, or lack thereof, are under the watchful eye of the international legal community. This judgment has effectively blurred the line between environmental law and human rights law, opening a new frontier in international litigation. Moreover, the ruling could also influence the private sector. Companies around the world may have to consider the environmental impact of their operations more seriously or face potential legal consequences. This verdict could therefore spur corporations to invest more in sustainable practices, contributing to the global fight against climate change. However, it is important to note that the implications of this ruling will not materialize overnight. It will take time for nations and corporations to adjust their policies and practices. Moreover, the effectiveness of this ruling in spurring change will depend largely on how well it is enforced and respected by nations worldwide. In summary, this landmark ruling has the potential to redefine how the world views and responds to the climate crisis. It underscores the idea that the environment is not just a matter of ecological concern, but also a human rights issue. Experts believe that this judgment may be a catalyst for significant changes in the way countries address climate change and human rights. As we wrap up, let's summarize the key points of this unprecedented climate case. The heart of the matter was that an international court in France found that the Swiss government had violated human rights due to their inadequate response to the climate crisis. This case was brought forth by Swiss women who felt their rights to protection from climate change impacts were infringed upon. The court's judgment was based on the finding that Switzerland's climate legislation was insufficient and that their failure to meet climate targets was a direct breach of these women's rights. This ruling, legally binding and the first of its kind, sets a significant precedent. But what does this mean on a larger scale? Well, experts are predicting that this judgment could have a substantial influence on future climate litigation globally. The implications could be far-reaching, potentially prompting other countries to revise their emission targets and accelerate their reduction of fossil fuel use. It's a wake-up call to governments worldwide, signaling that failure to adequately address climate change can and will be viewed as a violation of human rights. However, it's worth noting that not all climate-related claims in this case were successful. 2 other climate claims were dismissed, demonstrating that the legal landscape of climate litigation is still evolving and complex. Regardless, this ruling is seen as a significant step forward in climate litigation worldwide, with potential implications for other international courts. This landmark ruling has created a legal precedent linking climate change and human rights that could potentially reshape global climate litigation and policy. It's a historic moment that underscores the urgent need for meaningful action on climate change.